What's going on YouTube? I am dukedobbins FTW, and this year Battlefield 1 is really diving into uncharted waters with this World War I setting. We do not see this war explored very often. In fact, right now I genuinely can't think of a single World War I game that I've played, and I bet you can't either. In fact, off the top of my head, I can't even think of any movies or TV shows that have explored this war, which is pretty ironic because I would bet good money we could all easily list a dozen games or movies that revolved around World War II. But World War I gets no love, and it's important to understand why that is. It's hard to fit World War I into a compelling narrative because the war wasn't ever about big ideas that shape humanity, like democracy or slavery or communism. It was never about saving the world from a supervillain like you had in World War II. At best, World War I was fought over land and money. At best. At worst, and perhaps more accurately, it was fought over world leaders' egos, paranoia, and incompetence. And it's a very complex diplomatic escalation that led into the war. I don't want to dive too deep into the weeds of it, but I do think it's important we understand just how pointless and avoidable this war was. So basically, you have this ongoing territory dispute, like you do, between every country ever. This one's between Austria and Serbia, which motivates the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, an Archduke who is next in line to lead Austria. 5 of the 6 assassination conspirators are Serbians. Some of these Serbians were a part of the Serbian military, and they were led by the chief Serbian military intelligence guy, Dragutin Dimitrijevic, or however you pronounce that, which would be like the head of our CIA, right? So you have this scenario where Serbians have assassinated the future leader of Austria. So this understandably pisses off Austria, and the rest of Europe generally sympathizes with Austria at this point. Now, most of the conspirators and the actual assassin himself are investigated, tried, found guilty, and most of them are hung publicly or killed by firing squad. And this is all before the war has even started. Later on, after the war, in peace negotiations, Serbia agrees to imprison and or kill a bunch of other people who are thought to be somewhat involved as well. Alright, so the guys who did it get fucked up. But Austria still blames the Serbian government and Serbia generally for the loss of their would-be leader, which is still fair. You know, if people at the highest levels of your military conduct an assassination, the responsibility is more than just theirs personally and individually. But this is where things start to go wrong. Austria issues a list of demands that Serbia has to meet, or they're going to come in and fuck up Serbia's shit. But the joke is, the list of demands were made intentionally unacceptable, and this is where we start getting into the really complex behind-the-scenes geopolitical maneuvering. And I'm not going to dive too deep into the weeds of that because it would take so long to go over. There's a lot of pressure from Germany to make these demands so over the top and humiliating that no nation with any dignity or sense of sovereignty would accept them. And everyone in Europe who saw these demands basically knew this. Everyone agreed that the list of demands that Austria was making as reparations for the assassination were absurd and over the top. It included a demand that basically said nobody in Serbia was allowed to talk shit about Austria, and that Austria would be allowed to station troops within Serbia to arrest any Serbians that did talk shit. So Serbia comes back with what is generally considered a reasonable counteroffer. The counteroffer is rejected, and so begins World War I. And a lot of people have a lot of different opinions about why and who and what and when. I think the general consensus among historians is that Austria and Germany wanted to invade Serbia because they just didn't like each other, and that beef went back long before the assassination itself. And it was a territory beef. But the point is, the actual assassination, which to this day is the official reason the war started, was never actually a reason to go to war. It was an excuse to go to war. It's important you understand the difference. It's kind of like WMDs in Iraq or the Gulf of Tonkin with Vietnam, except both of those things were completely fabricated. Now, Germany backs up Austria. Russia backs up Serbia, because the Russians and the Germans don't like each other at this point either, for reasons that go back long before this. And Russia has friendly ties with Serbia, and Germany has friendly ties with Austria. But then this is where things start to snowball out of control. Russia gets involved, but Russia has an alliance with France. So now France has to get involved, and now Germany has to attack France too. And then this is where things get really dumb. England has no plans to join the war. They're gonna let them all duke it out amongst themselves, because they have nothing to gain or lose. It's these other countries' fucking issue. But then Germany, on its way to attack France, goes through Belgium, which Belgium isn't cool with, but because England is Belgium's ally, now fucking England has to join the war. And then it goes on and on and on, and before you know it, random countries from all around the world are getting involved in this war, and the war itself is over what? The assassination of the Archduke, how does that affect anyone outside of Serbia and Austria? None of the major countries had any real stake in the outcome of the initial conflict. France, Russia, England, and later on the US, they have nothing to gain or lose depending on the outcome of this dispute between Austria and Serbia. Austria itself doesn't even have anything to gain. It's not going to bring the Archduke back to life, and the guys who killed the Archduke have already been tried and executed. There was nothing to be gained by anyone in this war. Now again, you look at the behind the scenes political maneuvering, some people wanted land and money. You know, a lot of people at the top had ulterior motives, no doubt about it. It wasn't just a big accident. There were some fucking pricks who pushed it to that point for their own selfish objectives. And what's really telling is how the world changed after the war. Across all of Europe, you saw populist revolts against the upper classes of society, against the ruling classes of society. Because the common people who did the actual fighting and dying sort of came to realize that, hey, this was basically all for nothing. This whole war was avoidable, and there doesn't seem to be any reward for all our sacrifice. They were pissed. That societal backlash against the ruling and upper classes could be peaceful if you were in England, for instance, or very, very violent if you lived in a place like Russia. Now, this is the briefest of summaries of a super complex war, and there was a bunch of behind-the-scenes diplomacy, again, that played a big role in how things spiraled out of control, and I'm sure there will be a million people in the comments telling me, oh, I'm wrong because I forgot this nuance here, or when the German Kaiser spit on this guy's shoes, or, all these countries were itching to fight each other anyways, or whatever. But at the end of the day, most of the people doing the fighting and killing had literally nothing to gain one way or another. The average person's life in France, England, the US, their life wouldn't have been affected in any way by the outcome of this conflict between two small countries halfway across the world. And so there are two reasons this war doesn't get a lot of attention. First is that any game or movie that takes place during World War I is going to have to go through the pains of explaining, the complex, seemingly pointless dynamics that started it, which is a lot harder than World War II, because that war just boils down to a supervillain trying to take over the world. It's like a one-sentence explanation, really. It's really easy to understand that one. But even more than that, once you explain the actual reasons behind World War I, it's hard to sensationalize it. It's hard to make it one of these battles of good and evil and that stuff, because, World War I would be a comedy if it wasn't for the tragic loss of life. You ever see in the movies when two guys get in a bar fight and then somehow everyone in the bar randomly gets involved and it's total chaos? It was like that, but with guns and millions of people. And I bring this all up because I think modern gaming has done an absolute shit job of accurately depicting war. Every game's campaign tries to fit into this perfect cookie-cutter narrative where you have a bad guy and a good guy who goes through a series of Michael Bay obstacle courses to defeat the bad guy. It rarely depicts any scenario that has any practical relation to reality. Games these days love doing America versus China, America versus Russia, or China and Russia both at the same time. And they always conveniently skip over the fact that each one of these countries would drop nukes long before an invasion of their respective mainlands took place. I've never seen a game with a campaign where it's debatable who the good guy and the bad guys are. I've never seen a game explore at what point a good guy becomes a bad guy trying to defeat other bad guys. All I ever see these days is the stupidest shit. Russian terrorists tricked Russia into invading the USA. There's a coup d'etat to take out the Chinese government and then team up with Russia to take over the world. All of South America teamed up to destroy America. All of Asia teamed up to invade America. One exception might be Battlefield 3. War with Iran and suitcase nukes are things that could actually happen. Well, not so much the war with Iran anymore, but at the time. But for the most part, over the last 5 years, it's always some overblown, completely unrealistic scenario because games writers are super lazy and need an excuse for two major world powers to go at it. Games are an art form, and good art does more than just entertain you. It informs your perception of the world, and at its very best, it gives you insight into terrible experiences so you can understand them to an extent without having to directly experience them yourself. And this makes you a more effective human being. You'll have a more accurate view of the risks and consequences of war when you go to the voting booth, which is incredibly important. And I'm not against all wars, but I'm against dumb wars. And the only reason we get into dumb wars is because people think war is worth it at times when it isn't, because they don't fully understand the costs. World War I was a dumb war. When you look at something like that movie, Saving Private Ryan, the whole first hour of that movie was a super graphic D-Day sequence that was so chillingly accurate that actual World War II veterans broke out in tears at private screenings of it. And really, that first third of the movie had nothing to do with Saving Private Ryan. It was like a different movie almost. You could cut it out and the story would still make just as much sense. But Spielberg wanted to show people what that was actually like. And movies are able to portray that kind of shit in a vivid and immersive way that books or even first-hand accounts can't match. And games could accomplish that same shit, but they don't even try. At the end of Battlefield 4, they did what every lazy games writer does these days and just copy and pasted some Hollywood cliche into the shit. You have to choose which one of your friends should sacrifice their life to go back and arm the explosives, right? How original. But war isn't always about nobly sacrificing your life to save the world. A lot of the time, war is about people wasting their lives for no good reason at all. And World War I is the clearest example of that. And DICE would be seriously remiss if they failed to accurately portray that in their Battlefield 1 campaign. The For the Win query of the day: is what is your favorite FPS campaign of all time and why? Thanks for watching. Please remember to rate. This is Batman, signing out.